In this episode, you'll discover the foods most strongly linked to inflammation and disease progression, and why removing them can create healing momentum in your own body. You've been told it's incurable, but here at Renegade Remission, we believe in rewriting the story. If you're facing a terminal or chronic illness, you are not alone. I'm Eleni Welch, certified nutritionist, and each week I share healing strategies and remission stories to help you take control of your health, feel better, and rediscover hope. Welcome back to Renegade Remission. By the end of this episode, you'll understand which foods consistently worsen inflammation across chronic and terminal illnesses, why the body reacts so strongly to them, and how removing them can support your immune system, energy, and healing capacity. If you stay through to the end, I'll share simple, gentle food swaps that reduce inflammation without making your life harder or restricting you into misery. If you study the stories of people who heal from serious illness, such as autoimmune disease, cancer, neurological conditions, heart disease, chronic infections, there is something striking that almost always shows up early in their journey. They stop eating certain foods that keep their bodies in a state of stress, inflammation, and metabolic overload. Your body is constantly trying to repair and restore itself, but when you consistently eat foods that increase inflammation, generate free radicals, disrupt the microbiome, and spike blood sugar, your system becomes so overwhelmed that healing takes a backseat to survival. Today, I want to walk you through the foods most consistently linked to inflammation and disease progression, explain the science in a way that feels empowering, not scary, and share a real story of remission where removing these foods played a major role. Let's start with that story. This is a 2017 open access rheumatology case report published in a peer-reviewed journal. A woman in her mid-30s who had been struggling with painful, debilitating rheumatoid arthritis for years, had swollen, stiff, tender joints, her inflammatory markers were persistently high, and despite medications, she continued to deteriorate. RA is an autoimmune disease known for causing joint destruction and systemic inflammation. Complete remission without aggressive medication is not commonly published in the literature, especially after years of active disease. Her turning point came after a conversation with a clinician who specialized in autoimmune nutrition. He suggested she try removing foods most frequently associated with triggering immune activation in people with rheumatoid arthritis, particularly gluten and dairy. She had nothing to lose, so she committed to an 8-week trial. She transitioned to a whole food diet centered on vegetables, fruits, legumes, lean proteins, nuts, seeds, and anti-inflammatory fats. She removed gluten and dairy entirely. Within weeks, she began feeling better. Her morning stiffness decreased, her pain diminished, her energy increased, and by the 2-month mark, her symptoms had nearly disappeared. Follow-up lab work revealed normalized inflammatory markers and the absence of clinical RA activity. Her physician documented the remission because the improvement was significant and occurred in clear temporal association with dietary changes. This case was an example of how removing immune-triggering foods can drastically influence inflammation and allow the immune system to recalibrate. Her story reflects something we see across many illnesses. When you remove what harms the body can begin to heal. Now let's walk through the major categories of foods most consistently linked to inflammation and chronic disease, supported by real research. The first is industrial seed oils, specifically when heated and processed. Oils like soybean, corn, cottonseed, canola, safflower, and sunflower oils are widely used in processed foods and restaurant frying. While these oils are not inherently bad, in fact, some of them have been around for thousands of years, we know Egyptians pressed sunflower seeds for oil. But these modern oils are high in omega-6 fatty acid content, which is much more prevalent in our diets today than it used to be, and it makes them more prone to oxidation, especially during industrial processing and repeated heating. Oxidized fats can contribute to increased oxidative stress and inflammation in the body. A BMJ systematic review and reanalysis by Ramsden and colleagues in 2013 found that increasing dietary 6 linoleic acid without increasing omega-3 intake was associated with higher cardiovascular mortality in men with existing heart disease. It highlights that heavily processed, repeatedly heated oils may contribute to an inflammatory internal environment. And when people reduce consumption of fried foods and ultra-processed foods high in these oils, they often experience meaningful reductions in inflammation. The second inflammatory food is added sugar and high glycemic foods. Frequent spikes in glucose and insulin are associated with oxidative stress, inflammatory cytokine release, and immune dysregulation. A well-designed clinical trial by Eberle et al. In the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2011 showed that young adults consuming high fructose beverages had increased levels of C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, two key markers of inflammation. High glycemic foods, those high in sugar that are rapidly absorbed and quickly converted into glucose, can contribute to blood sugar swings that stress the metabolic and endocrine systems. This effect over time is associated with increased risk of all diseases, diabetes, and worsened autoimmune activity. Just like with seed oils, it's not necessarily that sugar is the enemy, it's that the processing of it and the quantity of it we consume matters more than anything. The third common inflammatory food are ultra-processed foods. These foods contain additives, emulsifiers, thickeners, stabilizers, and artificial ingredients that make them convenient and shelf-stable, but very difficult for the gut to handle. A landmark Nature study in 2015 showed that common emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose disrupted the gut microbiota in mice, increasing intestinal permeability and triggering low-grade chronic inflammation. Although this was an animal study, it provides a mechanistic explanation for why high intake of processed foods is associated with autoimmune activity, digestive symptoms, and systemic inflammation in humans. Observational research consistently links ultra-processed food intake with higher disease risk, supporting what we often see clinically, which is when people decrease their processed food intake, their immune system calms down. The fourth inflammatory food is refined grains and flour-based foods. Refined grains digest quickly, behaving pretty much identically to sugar once they're absorbed in the body. They lack fiber, which means they enter the bloodstream rapidly, causing spikes in glucose and insulin. In a large cohort analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2002 by Liu and colleagues, found that diets high in refined grains were associated with markers of increased inflammation and higher risk of chronic disease compared to diets low in grains or that emphasized whole grains. Again, the issue may not be the grains themselves, it's the highly refined fiber-stripped versions eaten frequently and in large quantities. The fifth inflammatory food is processed meats. I'm not talking about fresh, pasture-raised, grass-fed meat, but specifically industrial processed meats. These meats, such as bacon, deli meats, sausage, pepperoni, and hot dogs, when conventionally prepared, often contain preservatives, nitrites, and compounds formed during high-temperature manufacturing that can contribute to inflammation and oxidative stress. The EPIC cohort analysis by Rohrman et al., published in BMC Medicine in 2013, found that high intake of processed meats was associated with increased mortality, cardiovascular disease, and systemic inflammation. It's important to note that fresh, unprocessed, pasture-raised meats do not demonstrate the same association. The issue lies in the processing, not the protein itself. Removing inflammatory foods is not about perfection, purity, or rigid rules. It's about reducing the burden your body carries each day. When you decrease foods linked to inflammation, whether they're processed oils, sugary snacks, emulsifier-containing foods, refined grains, or processed meats, you free up your immune system to focus on healing rather than constant crisis management. Even small reductions matter, and your body can respond even after smaller decreases in inflammatory load. Here are some practical action steps you can take today. You can start gently by choosing one processed snack you eat regularly and swapping it for a whole food option like nuts, fruit, vegetables, or a simple protein. You can also experiment with replacing industrial seed oils with olive oil, avocado oil, or coconut oil, or high-quality animal fats, especially when cooking at high heat. Another small shift is beginning your meals with protein or fiber, which helps stabilize blood sugar and reduce inflammatory spikes. Another thing you could do is to replace just one refined grain meal per day with a whole food option, or choose whole grains instead of white flour. While whole grains can still be high glycemic, it's better than not changing anything. And if sugary drinks are part of your routine, swap them out. Replace them with herbal tea or infused water. It's a simple shift that reduces metabolic stress. Chronic inflammation is one of the most universal threads across serious illnesses, not because inflammation is inherently bad, but because it is the body's attempt to protect you. Certain foods make the immune system's job harder, and when you gently reduce those foods, you lower the pressure on your body's healing systems. This is about creating an internal environment where healing becomes more possible. Your body is always trying to move towards this state of repair, and every small shift you make gives it the space to do exactly that. In our next episode, I'll cover an anti-inflammatory blueprint for chronic and terminal illness, so stay tuned for that episode and go be renegades.